Hi, so today we'll be talking about the patterns of growth in the adulthood phase of life. We have so far covered about childhood, infancy, prenatal, childhood, maybe early childhood, middle childhood, late childhood. Then last session we talked about adolescence. So today we'll be talking about adulthood. Now, when we talk about adulthood, generally we say that this phase is a lot more talking about a phase which is more matured, right? Like, if you go by the references from different books, articles, you will find that adulthood as such is not a stage clearly mentioned, but it is talked as a stage of maturity. Okay, so therefore adulthood is almost what we talk about the matured phase. A lot more development have already taken place. Now it is the peak of all forms of development. So this is how we perceive adulthood as, right? And as and when we finish, like when the stage of termination of adulthood approaches, that is the time when we see that there are symptoms of, or symptoms are as in the conditions laying down for senescence, right? So that again is very much contextual, very much individual trait, as in when that symptom appears. If a person has a good lifestyle, has a very active lifestyle, then probably the symptoms of senescence is totally different. I mean, the symptoms here, as in the conditions that determine senescence. So those conditions are totally different for an actively participating person in his or her own life, with respect to a person who has comparatively more sedentary lifestyle, right? So those conditions again vary. We do not clearly demarcate, but as such we say that after the teenage finishes, like around 20 years of your life, after that the whole stage which comes is the adulthood until 45 to almost 55 years, which is the stage when you have the symptoms or the conditions of senescence, as in your aging or your lethargic weakness, that diminution of the peaked form of development is quite visible by that time. So this is what we are going to talk today about adulthood. um, Now, when we are talking about adolescence, when we talked about adolescence, basically we were talking that everything is almost at the matured phase. Almost signifies that 90% brain development, 90% of your almost all of your height is reached. But that does not mean entirely that your physical growth, as in your linear growth, the growth of your skeleton, finishes when you reach adulthood. That's not the case. The growth of your skeleton does not entirely stops at the end of adolescent phase. um, it is that the longer bones, they do not grow any further, although your vertebral column still persist to grow for almost 20 to 30 years of your life. By that decade, generally your vertebral column is still growing, although that growth is very negligible, but it's almost around 3 to 5 mm. That's the average growth that we perceive that happens during that phase. Also, again, this is very much depending on your context, how good diet, how good active your lifestyle is, and therefore that determines whether your growth is still happening or not. But generally what we see is your vertebral column still continues to grow, although at a negligible rate, but it still continues to grow. The other bones, they have reached their highest peak, they have reached their utmost form of growth, so you do not see any further growth in your longer bones. But after 30 or almost 35 years of your life, till your beginning of senescence, your bones, your length of bones, your mass of bones is almost stationary. Again, if a person is having any genetic condition, that is a totally different case, right? After this 50 years of age, after your late adulthood, that's how we classify adulthood, as early adulthood, late adulthood. After the termination, like at the latest point of your adulthood, late adulthood, By that time, there are points when people develop the conditions of ossification. There are bone disorders and calcium deposits, things like that happen. Therefore, there's a decline in the mass of the bones, the length of the bone, so to say, also negligibly they decline. Okay, so during your entire adulthood stage that we are particularly discussing here, your length of the bones, your the growth that we see in your bones or your linear growth is almost stationary from 30 years till your 50 years of your life. Basically, when we talk about this phase, as I already mentioned, this is also called as the phase of maturity. Although your chronological age, as in your date of birth, exactly does not imply maturity. But when we talk about the maturity of your body or your developmental phases, they are determined by few biological criterias, so that we understand what is the maturity, how is the maturity, or how much is the maturity happening during that particular phase, right? So here in adulthood, we are talking about three forms of maturity. First is the skeletal maturity, second being the dental maturity, and third being the shape age. Skeletal maturity, basically when your bones show gradual development in its microstructure. Okay, for instance, we are talking about the formation of ossification center, and there are the subsidiary centers around that ossification center which try to fuse with that ossification center. Okay, so as in these developments are at a very minuscule, negligible level that is happening within your body. So that is one symptom. These basically ossifications are diagnosed using x-rays or measuring your calcium content. And also when you're talking about your bone age, especially using these ossification centers only, we can identify how is your, as in how much ossification has already been happening in your bones, and using that ossification method we identify what could be the probable bone age of your this is also used in forensic anthropology. It's an applied form to identify what could be the probable age of the person whose bones or skeleton has been gathered. So that could be one method, and therefore using this as ossification we try to identify what could be the bone age of that person. Second, we will be talking about dental maturity. Now again, it is an application of forensic anthropology, also used in paleoanthropology, like discovering the artifacts. Now dental maturity again is based on the stages of calcification, right? It's again visible through x-rays only, and so depending on how much calcification has happened will determine what is the maturity phase of your teeth, of your dental structure, right? Third being the shape age. Now shape age is quite difficult to derive because it does not clearly talk about whether it is in terms of your height, your weight, or even your IQ level. What is that, right? So basically when we talk about shape age, it is understood as the combination of body measurements which are taken into account, which changes with the age but is independent of its final size or shape. Okay, so as in again, it implies a sort of maturity that we're talking about. At a given point of time, what is your body measurements after a certain age? What is like it's a longitudinal measurement, so to say. And if at all a person is monitoring himself or herself, they know their weight and age at what particular weight and height at particular age they have done the measurement, and after like 10 years 20 years they do that measurement again, or they are monitoring yearly basis. So us according we determine that okay, there has been constant there's a plateau in your weight, in your height, but your weight is not proportionate to your height. So that is one measurement that we can make out after, like, say, when you did your first measurement at 20 years of your age, then you do at, let's say, 35 or 40, then you try to identify what has been the change. generally height do not change. Maybe your emotional quotient, your IQ level probably would change, right, over the period of time. And again, your cognition and your intellectual abilities does undergo different changes over age. So that could be one thing. Then after 35, after 20 years, we are doing the measurement, we are seeing a drastic change we saw 2 decades back, right? So that comparison could help us identify what is the shape, age measurement, or the criteria, I mean the condition of a given person after few ages of his life. Now, therefore, it cannot be simply identified using one single trait. It is a multiple maturational characteristic trait that is identified using the shape age method. Okay. When we're talking about the phases of adulthood, there are two splits that we do in this adulthood: early adulthood and the late adulthood. Early adulthood is basically starting just after your teenage, from 20 years till 40 years of your life. Late adulthood is starting from 40 till, I mean, I would not say it's 65 again, because every person have different conditions for their senescence, and there's a very thin demarcating line between late adulthood, the termination of late adulthood, till your appearance of senescence, because that lethargy, weakness, and the diminishing of all form of developmental traits that happens starting from your late adulthood itself. Okay, so there is a very thin demarcating line, and this broader bracket generally gives the idea that, okay, some people who have an active lifestyle in their youth would probably have a late symptom of senescence, or they probably would not have the severe form of conditions during their senescence, right? Whereas when we compare to a person who totally had a sedentary lifestyle, working in an IT industry, totally sitting on computers, and every day just sitting on your desk, making a more sedentary lifestyle for himself or herself, would have a severe biological sort of symptoms, conditions during their late adulthood itself. Some do have it during their early adulthood, like that degradation of your bones, of your muscles are visible even in your early adulthood, like almost around 35 to 40 years of your life. So this is the thing. Let's talk about these individual splits, the traits that are visible in the individual splits. For early adulthood, we observe the interactions among multiple aspects of development here, because now everything is at the peak, like beginning of the early adulthood. Everything is at peak: your strength, your energy, your endurance, your physical growth, your brain development, everything has happened. 90% of thing happened in adolescence. Depending on if it is at all your stimuli, your social environment is actually helping you out with that nurturing of 100% brain development or not. So that peak is basically visible in early adulthood itself. By mid-20s, most of your body functions are fully developed. Then your physical capabilities start decline. It's a symptom of late adulthood, as in when you reach your 50 years of your life. Until then, your physical capabilities do not decline. You do not show any lethargic feature or any weakness feature. Again, 50 years is very much contextual here. Okay. Now talking about early adulthood, your height is stable from 30 to 45 years, because I already mentioned that almost 3 to 4 mm ka average difference does come from 20 to 30 years of your life. See, the reason here is because now you are more into career development, personality development, and like if we talk about the current scenario, people are more exposed to physical activity. 20 to 30 years is like you are grooming yourself, so a lot more physical activity, lot more into traveling or exploring things. So person is quite involved in these activities, and therefore that could be one factor wherein your height is showing some growth. After that 30 to 45 years, because of these biological criteria that we talked, the height stagnates. Okay, after that it begins to decline. Now Decline as in, your body becomes loopy, your shoulders are slightly bent, so therefore that is a visible decline in your total overall height. Now at 25 to 30 years of your life, you are at the peak of your muscular strength. There is a 10% loss of strength between 30 to 60 years of your age. Manual dexterity is efficient in young adults, as in your manual skills, your proficiency keeps on improving during your youth. Agility is reduced only after your mid 30s. Here, your sensory organs, they are at the sharpest or at the peak during young adulthood. It was also visible, when we were talking about childhood. The child was trying to explore all form of sensory organs, remember? So those were the phases when they were, we could not call it as at a peak, but they were trying to explore all of these things. By then a child does not even know whether they know the taste of a salt or not in the food, but by now we are almost actively having our sensory organs. We have realized the taste, we have developed a form of preference in food, and things like that. Here, there is a keen visual activity at 20 years, which declines almost around 40 years. Now, because of the deposition, there are symptoms of cataract, and there are fluid depositions in the eyelids. So that is a factor wherein we see that there's a decline in your visual activity. Apart from that, if you talk about lifestyle disorders like diabetes, CVDs, that can have an impact on your vision capabilities, right? So that again is very much contextual. If a person is having a disease history, probably those symptoms could appear even early. Now there are hearing losses apparently visible after 25 years itself. A person, that high pitched sound is difficult to be heard. Like, it's not entirely you cannot hear it, but it starts diminishing. That is the point. Hearing loss starts after 25 years of your life. Third, regarding your taste, smell, sensitivity. So far, there is no diminution in your adulthood phase. You do not lose your sensitivity to pain. You do not lose your smell. Apart from a person, if they had an accident or if they, suffer from some injury. Apart from that, probably there's a very limited case of having this diminution of taste or smell until you reach your 50 years. Okay. Smell, olfactory is one thing which is lost at the end. Like, after you lose all your sensory organs degrade by the age, smell is something you do not. That diminution is very little, and it happens at the last of all stages. Okay. Now, so this was about early adulthood. Talking about late adulthood, there are gradual changes which are hardly noticeable until the symptoms appear. Symptoms, as in the conditions of these late adulthood, we'll be talking, these appear. It's quite difficult to demarcate whether it will be late adulthood senescence, because as I already mentioned, there's a very thin line between the two. It could be a symptom because of your age. It could be a symptom because of your disease history. So that needs to be very clearly demarcated. What could be the probabilities in? Okay. Though it is very hardly noticeable. Here also we'll see that physical functioning, your health is good, still good, but not at the peak. Okay. You do feel lethargic, you do feel weakness of your body, but it is not like the senescence stage. It is not like your activity is not like your early adulthood. So that is one thing. Then there are changes visible in your sexual and reproductive capacities. Example, this is the stage when the termination of menstrual cycle takes place in females, as in the stage of menopause. Then in your males you have andropause, as in there are male climacteric symptoms. I will be talking about it later. There are symptoms like you have weakness, your body feel weak, and things like that. So that are associated with andropause in males. So this is one thing. Then there are changes in your sensory and your motor capabilities. Motor skills we have already discussed. So over the period of time, your grasping power, your involvement of fine and gross motor muscles, that reduces. Along with that, there are changes in sensory, as in your vision, I've already talked, they also keep diminishing. Then your taste, because taste buds go with the ages, right? Apart from that, your olfactory lobe depends on your there's a lobe in your brain, so that is controlling your smelling sense. So if that is affected directly due to some injury, due to some disease background, so that could be one reason wherein your sense is being affected. Apart from that, smell is being affected. Apart from that, there could be very limited reason that your smell gets affected, because if there's no direct impact on olfactory lobe, with respect to age, it does not diminishes. When we're talking about eye lenses, they become very less elastic. There's an inability to focus, or this far-sightedness. When we talk about aged people, it's very commonly visible in the elderlies, right? So therefore they use those bifocal lenses, which is nearsighted as well as far-sighted. During your middle age, you also tend to lose your hearing skill, as in I already talked that after 25 years it starts diminishing. So until you reach your senescence, you fail to hear that high pitched sounds, and it keeps diminishing. Even in late adulthood, these symptoms are still persisting. After 55 years, that hearing loss is greater for women than greater for man than for women. Taste sensitivity declines at the age of 50. Again, depending on whether a person is exposed to any form of disease history, that has an association with taste buds also. Next is about the smell sensitivity. See, it is the last sense that comes to the decline. Okay, so this is it. Then people who had a sedentary lifestyle, they have looser muscles, they have lower energy levels, and that keeps degrading as and when you proceed with your age. It also has a correlation of deaths which occur because of heart attacks or cardiac arrests, things like that, right? So sedentary lifestyle, poor bone density, poor muscle mass, all these things are correlated. Now, active lifestyle in young age basically reaps more stamina and resilience, as in your immunity is being actively improved if you are actively involved in your lifestyle, in some sports, physical activities. Even after 60 years of your age, there are very good examples, if you see, who set a good example of having more fit lifestyle. Even in their late age, they are still very much proactive in their lifestyle. So that is one thing. Then your motor skills also keep declining as you proceed with your age. By 60 years of your age, like during your late adulthood, you already see a decline in your motor skills. When we talk about your cardiac system, basically there's a reduced ability to pump blood. Okay, even if you are actively involved, because of age, your ability to pump blood reduces. And if at all you have a sedentary lifestyle, because of junk food, oily food, all the sort of oily food, your blood, there are clots, and your arteries basically do not let that kind of blood flow through your body, through those arteries, and therefore that is the consequence of cardiac arrest. But apart from that, when there is a limited pump of blood from your heart, there's a reduced oxygen supply to all of your organs. Therefore, particularly when we talk about few organs like your kidney, there's a reduced kidney functioning. Then in your gastrointestinal tracts, there is a less enzymatic secretions. Therefore, if you see in elderlies, there's a very constant issue of constipation, of indigestion, or there are urinary problems and sexual problems and things like that. So These symptoms are associated with how much oxygen is being supplied to all of your body organs, how much they are connected with the heart, and uh, over the age how degrading they are with respect to their functioning, right? Now there are different impact of age on reproductive capacities also. So for instance, we have already talked about women's ability to reproduce that terminates by the age of 50. I mean, that's the average age we take. The general bracket is 45 to 55 years. Within that age, generally you see the symptoms. With males also, they continue to do so. um, I mean, they are still in a fertile stage, although that potency, the fertility is decreased, right? When we were talking about the male climacteric symptoms, this is indicative of physiological, emotional, psychological changes which are involving a person's reproductive system and their other body systems, right? So it is not just about your reproductive system, but involvement of other emotional facets of your body which are being impacted because of your age. So that is how you see, I mean, weakness, depression, fatigue, lethargic, all these are symptoms of male climacteric symptoms. Okay, so this was about the adulthood. Next session we'll be talking about senescence. If you have any questions, just let me know. Thank you.